Yeah. Should be a good session.
Megan, I'm testing the audio. Can you hear? If you could either give a thumbs up or write in the chat that you can hear, let me know. Okay, come on up. Let's just see how it looks with you there. Yes, you can hear. Thank you. For some reason, the screen is showing that. Okay, perfect. Why isn't it showing?
Yeah, it's not gonna affect you if you want to do it, if you just want to yell at Nancy.
What is your number? You'll yell at people if they go in the back row. Yes, yes.
So did you know about our conference before I messaged you? That's awesome. Our Instagram did something. Okay, so it's doing the thing where it's not showing, it's not letting it advance. So let me learn how to do this. And then, oh, it is. That's not plugged in. That's weird. It's on the thumb drive right now. Yeah, and there, AHS, that one. It might be because of this little section right there. Mm-hmm. It's gonna be our updates almost every time I try to put it in.
I really like Lenovo, but sometimes.
Mm-hmm. So this session doesn't have a break after it. So I'm gonna grab this computer and run upstairs with it afterward. Yeah. So what did you do differently?
I just restarted it.
Okay. So I was doing it right. It was just okay. And it's not sharing to Zoom right now though. I'll do this right now. It's recording. Okay, cool. And then someone can introduce.
I think Rachel was going to do that.
Just so you know, in the very back middle rows, we're gonna have high school students sitting there, as they're joining us.
Yeah.
It's just us.
Oh, it is?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, you've got it.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
You flipped it.
Talking about the ferry, so.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, we're here. Yeah.
All right.
Volleyball.
No more targets.
Right, volleyball. They're heading to the volleyball game, right?
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
If you need any help with tech, Ashley will be here. I'm gonna go set up for the next one.
No problem.
So. Maybe take away comments. Yeah. What we get started out with.
Yeah.
We'll start out with. Thanks, Rachel. Well. This is Mike. Hello, as people are getting seated, we're going to get started in about 1 minute. And before we start our next session, Nancy Bird has an announcement to make to everybody. Welcome, everybody. Can everybody hear me if I just yell? Yeah, okay. Just a quick announcement of an addition to the program that I've just been able to make happen so that you can all have an opportunity to visit the Pioneer Igloo right next door, which has a whole lot of new old photographs that have just been put up on the walls, as well as a bunch of really nice old photographs that have been there a long time. But it will be open at 5 o'clock for you, and the best way to get in is the door that's right across the back alley here on the back side of the Pioneer. That way you go in through stairs that are enclosed out of the rain, and also have lots of stuff. So it'll be open for 30 minutes, maybe at most 45 minutes, thanks to Jim Casement, one of the Pioneer Igloo activists. So, awesome. Please pass the word. Hello, everybody. I'm really delighted to introduce to you Dominic Bush, Dr. Dominic Bush, who recently completed his doctoral work at East Carolina University. He's been doing some exciting research underwater. And just to know how impressive it is, I've traveled a lot in the Aleutians, and I know that it's hard to even fly to Attu or go there by boat, but the idea of someone doing underwater archaeology off that is truly impressive and defies anything that you can imagine. Dr. Bush is a research associate for Ships of Discovery Incorporated, and he's been working to document and preserve submerged World War II sites in the Pacific, including Attu Island. And he's from Hawaii, but he does have connections to the Cordova area. His grandmother is an original shareholder of the Chugach Corporation, and she was born in Cordova. So without any further ado, I will introduce you.
Thank you, Rachel, for that introduction. So I'm going to deviate a little bit from what the schedule is, and rather than giving a broad overview of our work at Attu, we're going to focus in on one shipwreck in particular that has deep ties to Alaskan history. It's not changing slides now. I don't know if let's see. No. It's not advancing. Oh, there we go. Is it visible on Zoom though? I don't know if it's. Okay, it is cool. Yeah, so then with technical delays aside, so my family has actually got some significant ties to Cordova. My great-grandfather moved here to help build the Orca cannery, and my great-grandmother being an Alaska native from this area. So that's really an honor to be a part of this conference. But enough about me, more about our project. And so we departed out of ADAC aboard Norseman II, which is out of Homer. It's a converted crab fishing vessel turned research vessel. And we went to Attu for about 5 days of survey, 14 of us, archaeologists, hydrographers, and marine robotics engineers. We use synthetic aperture sonar, and for those who are familiar with traditional side scan sonar, it's about 30 times the resolution, so it made it a really good tool for this project in particular. And then we also had the aid of a remotely operated vehicle, an underwater drone that our Japanese colleagues brought with them with their patent camera attachment. And so basically our objective was to survey a few of the bays around Attu looking for World War II heritage sites. But this story really begins 125 years earlier at the short-lived Hanlon Dry Dock and Shipbuilding Company, formerly right down there in the Oakland waterfront. Hanlon was part of the Shipping Board's 7th District, contracted to make 12 steel vessels, 11 of which are mentioned here in this news advertisement from 1920. Like her sister ships, Delwood was Emergency Fleet Corporation Design 1043, solely produced by Hanlon, about 320 feet long, almost 50 feet wide with a draft of 24 and a half feet. Cargo capacity of around 5,500 tons, top speed of around 10 knots, and it required a 30-person crew. The Delwood got off to an inauspicious start. When it was launched, the cribbing actually collapsed. The ship fell on its side, and it required 5 tugs to right the ship. An inspection revealed no further damage, so the ship was able to proceed to its sea trials, which it completed in early 1920. It was then contracted out to the Matson Navigation Company, and its original skipper was the famed John O'Brien, who here is aptly described as a pioneer of Alaskan waters and can be seen here on the set of the Buster Keaton film, The Navigator. So Delwood begins its career as a cargo ship, sailing out of the Bay Area, up the Oregon coast into Puget Sound, and then bringing with it lumber and building supplies to the Hawaiian Islands, and in return, agricultural products, namely sugar and pineapple. On November 2nd, 1920, it came back with a lot of pineapple, 43,000 cases of it, but perhaps more important than the cargo was the announcement that it would be transferred back to the shipping board, where sets the stage for it to be mothballed along with a few other Emergency Fleet Corporation ships. This photo is from World War II, but it gives you an idea of what the mothball fleet would have looked like there in Southampton Bay, in the San Francisco Bay area. So this $2 million ship is on vacation and is miring in anonymity till about November 1921, when it's made the announcement that it will replace USS Burnside as the main ship servicing the Washington, Alaska military telegraph and cable system, better known as WOMCATS. And so it heads to Seattle, where it's converted into a cable layer for about $200,000 at the Todd Dry Dock Company. Here you can see that that conversion was really turning that cargo hold into cable tanks. And here you can see Delwood moored at the pier in Seattle. And this broadside picture gives you a better image of what it looked like, especially its distinctive pointed bow, where it would have been doing a lot of the cable laying. And so as a cable ship, it operated mainly in between Ketchikan and Haines, servicing the cables there. But it would occasionally come up to Prince William Sound, including here in beautiful Cordova. And then to get an idea of what the ship would look like, on the left side, you have with the cable tanks with cable in it. And then on the right side, you see the crew members, and then you actually see spliced cable being paid out. So this ship is continuing to operate through 1923, and then it makes its trip down to Southern California, where it catches the attention of mariners and other folks for that kind of distinct design, but also for its operations and its largely Filipino crew. It establishes the first cable connecting Catalina Island with San Pedro Harbor in Los Angeles. The application of the radio telephone principle to this was a big feat for cable laying, and then inspired full page articles about this operation in Southern California. Returns to Alaska in July of 1923 in preparation for President Harding's visit during his voyage of understanding, the first sitting president to visit the U.S. territory of Alaska. The big announcement is made in 1923 that the entire cable system is going to be replaced, and so no other ship can do that but the Delwood. So it's scheduled to go to London to pick up the first 1,000-mile cable section, and which it does arrives in London in March 1924. Here it is at the Siemens Brothers factory, loading up those cable, returns and finishes the first section from Seattle to Ketchikan in May 1924, returns to London, comes back, finishes it from Ketchikan to Seward to much applause from the government. And again, to kind of give you an idea of what cable laying operations would have looked like in 1926, here you go. You can see them operating. The caption for this with the archives is really big sea cable, which I thought was pretty apt. Anyways, so it goes down to Puget Sound, where it makes where it establishes several cable laying records and earns further acclaim and continues to make headlines throughout the decade, whether it's helping repair earthquake damage to the cables, supposed sea magic, very fortunate to miss 10 hurricanes without any damage, helped to load cable for Manila, not going to Manila yet, and then also taking the chief officer of the Signal Corps on an inspection of the cable, of the Alaskan cable. It goes back down to Southern California, where it establishes fire control cables, and again, it's heralded as the only cable ship that the U.S. government owns. 1927, it goes viral, at least as viral as 1927 gets, for a story about a 30-foot, 20-ton orca that had gotten ensnared in the cable. Whether how truthfully it looked like that is debatable, but it made for a fun story that was even reprinted in several languages. 1929, it's casted as the star of an instructional film directed by Roland Barrett, and you can actually see a little bit of that film right here. This shows the men on the bow of Delwood paying out the cable, and this was going to be used as an instructional film for future cable laying operations. It then goes on a world tour, originally going through the Panama Canal, past the Straits of Gibraltar, through the Suez Canal, then going to Manila, where it did operate laying cables for about a month. Its stateside return saw the first time the three-star general flag was raised aboard the ship when General Gibbs came for his inspection of the cable system. At this time, another monumental decision is made regarding Alaska's telecommunications system, and this time it's going wireless. And so Delwood is tasked with bringing up the supplies for the first ever radio station to be built in Anchorage. That operation was actually publicly condemned for its use of the Filipino crew when there was, quote, many white Americans out of work. So some classic 1930s racism. And here you can see the ship and its Filipino crew being loaded up in Seattle. Over here, it's maybe hard to see, but there's actually telephone poles lashed to it. And so it's making its way to Anchorage for this. Of course, there's a bit of an irony as it's going to replace the cable. It's going to be no longer needed as a cable layer. And so after bringing up the supplies for the radio station, it makes one more repair, and then it is again mothballed, this time at Lake Union in Puget Sound, officially decommissioned in August 1932, and then sold a month later to P.E. Harris and Company, a salmon cannery, for a $20,000 cash bid. And then it is again brought to Seattle to Todd's Dry Dock to be converted back into a cargo ship for about $120,000 in 1933. Its service with P.E. Harris was relatively benign, though it did serve as a transport ship for Father Hubbard's death-defying scale of Unimak of the volcano there that was covered in the national papers. By the beginning of 1934, both Harris and the Alaska Steamship Company found a deal mutually beneficial, so they petitioned the government to remove restrictions against it as a common carrier, and that sale was okayed on Valentine's Day, 1934. Early on in his service with the Alaska Steamship, it was pressed into service as a relief ship after the 1934 fire in Nome, and here you can see it being loaded with 1.5 million feet of lumber to help rebuild the city. And with the city rebuilt, it begins to factor prominently into Nome's economy. Advertisements for that passage regularly being printed, the passenger list being front page news, and even services geared specifically towards Delwood passengers, whether that be cultural exhibits or services such as tailoring and storage. In 1936, Delwood is one of 3 ships to transport about $1 million worth of gold from Nome to Puget Sound. But perhaps my favorite use of it during then was the Arctic Vagabond cruise package that Alaska Steamship offered, which is essentially a goodwill visits from Nome to East Cape, Siberia. Starting in around 1937, the ship is now solely used for salmon canneries again, with a small disruption in 1939 during a labor dispute referred to as the Salmon War that actually saw the ship sidelined during these negotiations. That strike was short-lived, and so it could return to its salmon transportation, both of the fish itself, the canned fish, and of the crews of the canners themselves. And it still found time for side quests, whether perhaps more trivial as the American Boys magazine trip, a glorified Boy Scout trip, to more consequential missions, bringing the supplies to build airfields at both Nome and Point Barrow. Delwood found itself in the headlines in June 7, 1941, running aground in False Pass. The ship was okay, people were okay, it was floated, returned to Puget Sound for repairs. We get this update on its position, stormbound at Kodiak, rather innocuous, until you look at the date, and that date being December 6, 1941. So this is the last time it's mentioned as a commercial ship, because 10 days later, it's transferred back to the U.S. Government, to the War Shipping Administration, first as a time charter agreement, and then later as a general agency agreement in May 1942. And this, we know that it arrives back in Juneau on December 29th, 1941, back in Puget Sound, January 2nd. And this begins a kind of parade of going back and forth between Alaska and Seattle, transporting supplies as necessary, making its most substantial contribution in July, bringing the necessary supplies for the joint command post at Kodiak. For the remainder of the year, it's part of several number of convoys going west to Kodiak, east back across the Sound, and so forth until a hiatus in activity starting around November 1942. Delwood reemerges in the spring of 1943, this time, as you could probably guess, as converted back into a cable layer and a member of Task Force 16.8. We know that it arrives at Adak in mid-March of 1943 for its first Aleutian cable laying mission, proceeding to Amchitka, and then coming back, establishing the shore connection there at Kirilov Bay, going south of Adak Straits and up through Tanaga Pass back to Adak. And then from there, it would kind of just hang out, made its way to Dutch, eventually departs Kodiak on May 17, 1943, in preparation for its final mission, which is in July of 1943, returning to the Aleutians, arriving there on July 8th. 1943 goes on a cable repair mission the next day, but then on July 14th, it makes its way to Attu as part of Task Group 16.2. On July 17th, it's mentioned as one of several ships anchored at Massacre Bay. And we know because of its escort, the minesweeper USS Herald, that it departs Massacre Bay on July 18th for Shemya to establish a cable at the airfield on the west side of the island, and then establish cable from there back to Massacre Bay via Chirikov Point. But around midday on July 19th, it strikes a submerged pinnacle. And thanks to this guy, we actually know the final moments of Delwood. And so USS an Army tug responding to a dispatch to assist the stranded Delwood, attaches a tow line, starts pulling it off the rocks, but LCT 354 then comes in between, parts the tow wire. They have to reestablish it. But by now, the ship is starting to really list towards the port and by the stern. So they take off all the salvage personnel, they burn the tow wire, and Delwood sinks immediately. In 1943, they did try to float it, but it was unsuccessful, so it was a complete loss. They did try salvaging it twice in 1944 with the USS Cree and USS Explorer, but by May 6, 1945, the Army made a decision that salvaging it would have been impractical and futile. At around this time, the USCGS does its first and only hydrographic survey of Massacre Bay, where they do find the wreck, and the reports show a progression in the wreck status. 10 feet of the cargo boom is exposed, it's buoyed, but by the end of 1944, neither the boom nor the buoy are there anymore, and it's reported that the mast is visible, so it shows up as a very shallow point on the bathymetry maps. So it's gone, but is it forgotten? Well, since there was no loss of life during this accident, there was no need to really report it in the papers, and so there was no official announcement of the sinking of Delwood during the war. There were some initial stories about crew members who had ties to Delwood. There was some On This Day in History articles, and then again, as I said, it really left its impression in Southern California for its mission in Catalina, which was then again covered in the 70s. And then we get this period of about 40 plus years where it's ostensibly forgotten. And that is until July 20th of this year, 81 days to the sinking of Delwood. We're here in our lab aboard Norseman 2. If you look at the middle of the screen, you can kind of see what we call the waterfall. And so that's the sonar image live feed that we are receiving. And using all the available archival data I could find, gave some coordinates to our hydrographers, to our vessel captain, and well, this is what we found. So this right here is what remains of the Delwood in about 110 feet of water. This is the 300-foot vessel. We were not really prepared for it to be this disarticulated, this destructed. I've worked on numerous shipwrecks, and so this, to me, looks intentional. My guess would be that, you know, after they made the determination that it was no longer salvageable, they decided, hey, let's flatten this basically, so it's no longer a navigational obstacle for ships operating in Massacre Bay. We can make out a few components of the sonar imagery, including these cylindrical objects that are about 10 feet in diameter, which I believe to be the cable tanks. But to get a better idea of what the ship looks like, we splashed that underwater drone, the ROV, and it gave us images, gives us thousands of photos actually, and hours of video. And we got things from large structural elements such as these beams and truss to really small details, as you can see the wiring, you can see the copper, you can see the insulation, and perhaps most significantly, we found the winch, which again confirms that this is the shipwreck we're looking for, and that this was in fact the Delwood, this cable winch being the main purpose that it was at Attu. So 81 years later, Delwood makes its return to the headlines during the press coverage of our project as one of 3 shipwrecks we found off the coast of Attu. So this odd craft, started as war surplus, turned into a cargo vessel, then became instrumental in Alaska's telecommunications, eventually ushering in the wireless age, which made it obsolete. So it was transferred back into commercial service until the Second World War, when it's pressed back into action, first as a cargo ship and then as a cable layer, the latter of which brought it to that fateful mission in July of 1943. And 81 years later, we now know the final resting place and what Delwood looks like today. So we're hoping that this kind of combination of history and archaeology can be used more often in Alaska's maritime history to kind of recover these stories of shipwrecks and other perhaps forgotten historical events because they're beneath the ocean. So with that, so many people to thank, but I really want to shout out our funders, the NOAA Ocean Exploration and the National Park Service, American Battlefield Protection. And that's my time. If you are interested in the project, I highly encourage you to check out the NOAA website that they made for it. We'll be updating it with more and more results. But yeah, so thank you to Rachel for allowing me to give this presentation. And with that, I think we might have time for a couple questions. We have 5 minutes. And if it's easier to email, please email me or find me around the conference. I obviously love talking about this. So thank you for listening.
jurisdiction? Whenever there are things underwater, who has jurisdiction, depending on where it is or who has?
So the question was, who has jurisdiction of these wrecks, which is an excellent question. And the U.S. actually passed the Sunken Military Craft Act in 2004 that basically protects any a ship that was owned by the U.S. military. This one, of course, though, wasn't technically owned by the U.S. military. It was a time charter agreement, so it remained property of the Alaska Steamship Company. So really, the ownership at this point then is transferred back to the state of Alaska through the Abandoned Shipwrecks Act. And so it falls within that 3-mile limit. So it's technically, its managerial duties are those of the Department of Mining and Water. But for the Japanese shipwrecks we found, those are still Japanese military property. The U.S. government acknowledges the vessel sovereignty, so those technically remain property of Japan.
Got one more question in the back there.
You alluded to this, that you thought that when the ship was found its resting place on the ocean, only 81 years ago, that there may have been something that happened. We have ships that are 500 years old that we find they're pretty much intact.
Perfect.
And they are made of wood.
Mm-hmm.
So it's interesting that that ship looks like a skeleton. Can you allude on that, or can you expand on that, or what if you have a thought about what happened to that?
Yeah. So the question is, what do we think caused that severe disarticulation of the ship? And my guess, and I've seen it in other places in the Pacific, where these shipwrecks are, especially ones that are close to the surface, make excellent bomb practice. So not only was it a navigational hazard, I'm guessing your attitude, there's not a lot to do there. They probably, I mean, we definitely know they were doing that with one of the Japanese shipwrecks that was closer in one of the other bays. So we did find some things that could be unexploded ordinances in the vicinity, some very suspicious looking targets that have been yet to verify. But my guess is it was a combination of necessity and, well, they got to do something. There was 10,000 people stationed on this island with nothing to do.
Great. Well, we need to move on to the next one, but I hope that, if you'll ask questions of excellent, there's one, take level of Katie. What's your?
I was just wondering if you considered possibly a National Register designation.
Yeah, so we're in the process of doing the NRHP and the AHRS nomination forms for this wreck and the other 2 Japanese shipwrecks.
All right, we'll let you guys. That was great. Yeah.